Richard Miller, again with Facts for Working People. And I wanted to just comment on some things that have been on my mind just recently. You know, as I said, I've said in the past, I was a union activist. I worked for a public utility that had an elected public board on it. And my local was the blue collar local there. And for many, many years, like a lot of these boards, we had a liberal on the board. It was dominated by really, they're supposed to be non-partisan, but they're not non-partisan. They're representatives of one, either Democratic or the Republican parties, and either way they function under the auspices of the market. No matter what they do, they're really bourgeois politicians with that work within the limits of what competition and the free market. But we always had this liberal, we had a couple of them, liberals on the board. And for years, when I first got there, they would vote, the way it was put, well, look, if we didn't have them on the board, a voice on the board, we would have nobody. And there was always this terrifying fear. It's a bit like if we don't support the lesser of two evils, we have nobody. Never mind the fact that with the working class, organizations of the working class, and even though we're only 12% organized, they're still immensely powerful organizations. And of course, the working class as a whole is an immensely powerful force in society, a potentially powerful force, which is why they are always trying to keep us divided. So you would have these liberals on the board, and they would be our voice. And they would regularly vote when a vote came up. They would vote they would vote on the union side. So they'd have this very good voting record. Look, they voted on the union side. Well, that was the end of it. It was very good for them because they had this liberal voting record. And of course, I remember during the strike in 1985, we had one on there, and we never saw her on the picket lines, but there was a whale that was trapped in the bay, if I remember, in 1985, and she was out there for Humphrey the whale. Very concerned about Humphrey the whale, and I'm concerned about whales, but also workers and our families' living standards are part of the environment and need to be supported as well. But that's the sort of game they play, the liberals, in this situation. And for years, I used to introduce this issue of the Labour Party when I first came here, and we need to run our own candidates. The Labour movement needs to have its own candidates based on the trade unions at the time. I would have put it that way. And for a number of years, no Liberal could get elected, get endorsed by my local. We were very much involved with Tony Mazzocchi and his Labour Party efforts in the 80s, the late 80s, early 90s, when he was going around calling for a Labour Party. He came to my local, he stayed with me actually, and I was very much, and my local was very much involved in trying to get that issue a voice. And in my workplace, my place of work, the board, my local for the longest time never endorsed a Democrat, never supported a Democrat. Prior to that, we'd given $10,000 in '88 to a Liberal on the board. And like I say, that was the game they played. And I'm sort of reminded by it because you might have seen on our blog a little bit of a clip of a protest at San Leandro City Hall, where I live, by a trailer park residents who investors have bought up this place, Trailer Haven. They go around the world doing that. They go around the country doing that. There's money in that. Sort of like gentrification. They buy them up. Who knows what they want to do with them? It's just a business enterprise for these types. And if you look at the last video, I'll put a link to it if I get this on the blog. And there's some other stuff on there, a Guardian video about this process of gentrification and buying up and making millions of dollars from trailer parks, poor people, low-income people, and what have you. So anyway, they bought this up. They've jacked up the rents. They've added new fees like certain utilities and what have you. So there was a protest at City Hall. So we were outside, and they were protesting there. Out come two of the Liberals on their board. Now I don't know one of them very well, but it's very common. They came out among us. the ones that are more that don't give a damn and are more honest about, in many ways, about their politics never appeared. But the two Liberals come out. One of them, I don't know, Ursula Reid. I don't know her very well. I've seen her before. She always talks about how she's a renter and this, that, and the other. And Jim Proler, who I've named them because I'm going to send this to them. And they come out and they stand out there. And one of them was saying, Miss Reid, you know, I'm out here to listen. I want to find out what's going on. I didn't get along very well with her. I'm not really interested in this little game they play. And she said something to me about it's not us and them. But you see, this is a trick. They know exactly what's going on. They know what's happening in terms of rents. They come out there to this facade of I'm on your side. Now, we know they can't do anything because the trailer haven victims of these landlords, they've approached Barbara Lee, who is a big darling of the Liberals here, the Democratic Party, and other politicians, and they said there was nothing they can do for them. The reason there's nothing, of course, there's not things they could even do, small things they could help them. I'll move on for a second. I don't want to digress. But so we know they can't do anything. It's phony that they come out and claim that they're out there to listen. The other guy, Proler, I've known for many years. He's on the council. I worked with him, not with him, but in the same place as him. And I knew him for years in the unions, and he always oriented toward the power in the unions. He's really the candidate of the Labour officialdom on our city council. And when he was in the Labour movement, and I was in the Labour movement at the same time with him, he never really oriented toward the rank and file of the Labour movement, but toward the leadership of the Labour movement. But there was a very the reason they can't help them, of course, Barbara Lee can't help them, is because it's legal theft. The landlords can do this. There's no rent control. And I'm not opposed to rent control. We can get some rent control. But in the last analysis, it's like OSHA. You know, we have OSHA. There's a tiny handful of people for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of job site. Working class people can't rely on OSHA for the safety at work. We can rely on organisation, how well organised we are, our own strength and power, and our ability to impede work taking place, our ability to stop production. That's where our power lies. So these politicians are of no use to them at all. And it was interesting, but they play this game, you see. It's like the Democratic Republican thing. And so when we, going back to that period when I was at work and my union wouldn't support any Democratic politician, it never hurt us. We were well organised. We were quite tight. We had an active, in most unions, unless there's major issues going on, there's never a huge amount of activity. But we had a very active leadership and tight membership that was active. And also our whole philosophy, the dominant philosophy of the leadership was we rely on our own strength. We reach out to our communities. We build links with other unions, and we try to fight not only in our own workplace, but in other work to fight within the wider movement to make it stronger and what have you. So it never hurt us not supporting Democrats at all. You'll get as much from a Republican or a Democrat if you're organised and you're strong. They'll throw reforms at you to prevent independent action, in particular independent political action. But as I say, there was an interesting thing that happened as we went. Me and Jim always get into it. I have no personal animosity to him, although I worked with him and was not very impressed with his political methods, and also is buried deep in the Democratic Party. And but it was interesting. We sort of got into it a little bit, as we do, inside the council building. There's a reason people don't go to these things. They can't sit there. They can't spend their nights away from their kids, away from whatever they're doing, their second job, to go down to a city council where people just sit there and listen to you, and you know damn well they're not going to do anything. But it was interesting because we got into it, me and him, but prior to the meeting, one of the representatives of the landlord was there too. I was actually a little out of line. I called him a pimp, I think I did, but I shouldn't have done that. It's not good to be personal like that. But it's very, very difficult to maintain it when you see older people, disabled people, people at the mercy of a couple of yuppies, and I've seen this time and time again, who are investing. You know, as I said when I spoke to the board, they could have been investing in a condom factory. You know, it doesn't matter. They're victims. They never even mention them. And so me and Jim got into it a little bit, and I said something about you could be playing a different role. And I said you should be providing an alternative. He was, you know, it's this whole thing about, well, I help them. I can do this. I can get a little bit there. We used to call it, you know, we can lessen the blow. When I first got involved in negotiations, I believe that we can lessen the blow. We make it a little softer, the pain. I've changed that after one set of negotiations, that was not the method and the way to go. But so he said something like that to me, and I said, well, you should provide an alternative. And he said, oh, I don't have an alternative. You provide an alternative. Well, that's very telling, because one, I'm not on the city council, and I'm not a politician in that same respect. Secondly, if you don't have an alternative, you end up in these positions. I'm not opposed to running for office. I ran for Oakland City Council in 1996. But if this is exactly what happens on these municipal board and local councils and stuff like that, is people get on, vote for me, but I'm going to defend. It's always very vague language. I will fight for. Hillary Clinton will fight for. So-and-so will fight for. They don't tell you how they're going to fight for it, but what they won't tell you is the only way we can win it is to mobilize the power of the united working class people in our communities, in the workplaces, and in the unions, in a direct action movement to stop business as usual. And out of that, to a political alternative will develop. But he said to me, I don't have an alternative. Then what happens is these people on these boards, these liberals on these boards, end up acting as agents of the very people and the very forces they claim that they are. We should support them because they're going to fight those forces to defend our interests, our schools, our towns, or what have you, our jobs. They end up acting as agents of big money and big power. And so why is that? It's not necessarily that they enter that way, but that's where you will always end up. And it's the same if you do not have an alternative. And like when I get up there, and I know people sometimes get a little sick of me saying it, I always make the point that we cannot rely on these people. When I ran for Oakland City Council in 1996, I remember it was a $10 an hour minimum wage at that time, which was a big deal. That was one of my campaign slogans. And I remember particularly some young people that say to me, well, can you get me $10 an hour minimum wage? And I said, I can't get you anything. Even if you elect me, I can't get you anything, because I don't believe we change anything that way. But activists running at the local level or running for political office like that, what we can do is use that office to help build the movement, to force the mass movement, the wider direct action movement that can force concessions from these people, from the power. When you go down to City Hall, the people that have power in City Hall, they're not in those meetings. They talk afterwards. It's all private. It's all done. The investors, the big corporations, the banks, and other forces. When I ran for Oakland City Council, it was very clear when I was reading the this was back then, economic analysis of the area, and it made it very clear that what determines what happens in Oakland is Pacific Rim trade. You know, this Oakland port has a container port that's one of the third or fourth largest in the country. So it was very telling when he said that, because if that were the case, he should step down. And instead, they play that game. They get a little crumb here or there. They actually accomplish nothing. And the damage they do by not telling the truth, by not telling people that we cannot win this way. We have to build a movement. We have to widen the movement. It has to be a direct action movement. And if we put anybody forward politically, a candidate forward, that candidate that person has to be rooted deep in that movement, have their feet in that movement, and tied to that movement. And the whole orientation should be that the political position is to help build, widen, and strengthen that movement. And it's the same in the union. There's a point at which you get, as a negotiator, and I've seen people do it, I've negotiated 3 contracts, rank and file person, we never got paid or anything like that. And if you have if you don't have a view that we have to build a wider generalized movement against capital, and in this period in particular, and in what's happened after the election in particular, they're going to come deep, they're going to come very aggressively after the public sector and all the other stuff we've seen from this monster Trump and his cronies. But unless you have that view that we can't vote this, we can't change this, we have to push upwards, not end up pushing downwards, which is what they do. So, because when you go up against the boss and you come up suddenly against this obstacle, you're stuck. If you're a genuine person and you think, well, you got elected, I want to fight for my folks. And you come up against this obstacle, the bosses and everything all around them. You come up against it, and you now have a decision to make. You know, the boss is going to say, "Well, I haven't got the profit, or I'm not making profit, or we can't afford to do this, or we can't afford to do that." So what do? You either have to have the view that we cannot win without mobilizing this generalized a wider movement of working people, and out of that, an independent political organization of workers and middle class people. If you don't have that view, you either get out, which is the honourable thing, that's fair enough, or you end up betraying. You have to back off that pressure from below, from your own people, you know. So I just wanted to share this as part of my experience. As part of this, for me, is to help me remember. I've been retired for a while, but I like to stay political. It's to help me remember because we had some considerable successes in my workplace and in my local with regards to the employers, and also in the struggle against racism and sexism in the workplace, which are two very divisive and tactical measures that the bosses use in one way or another, often covertly, to undermine workers' power. So anyway, that's it for today. Richard Miller, Facts for Working People blog, and our address is we know what's up, one word, no apostrophe, we know what's up.blogspot.com. Thanks.